Now, at the same time, we've got shortages for other kinds of cancer drugs. I didn't understand this. I just read Peter Bach's paper that said, gee, you know, we've got these really high prices for cancer drugs. Pharma companies should be tripping over themselves providing all these drugs. Why do we have cancer drug shortages? It turns out that a survey of oncologists in 2013 identified a handful of drugs that are so-called sterile injectable drugs. These are drugs that have to be injected at a physician's office, and they happen to be generic, where doctors can't get access to these sterile injectables. And they actually surveyed 200 some doctors and asked, over the last 6 months, have you experienced the situation of wanting to prescribe a drug and not being able to because the drug didn't exist or wasn't available? And 87% of oncologists in this survey responded yes. At least once in the last 6 months, they could not prescribe a particular drug of choice because it was not available. And so what do they do instead? Well, this is the really scary and shocking part. This is what they did instead. 78% of them switched chemotherapy regimes. So in other words, they gave you a different drug. Not their preferred, but a different one. 76% substituted a different drug partway through the treatment regimen, because if a drug ran out, you'd have to switch drugs. 43% delayed the treatment, 36.9% excluded some patients, 29% just omitted the doses. I mean, this is having a real effect. Why is it the case that these drugs are not available? Well, this got to be such a problem that the Department of Health and Human Services was asked to study this. And they, in fact, documented that the problem was with these sterile injectable cancer drugs, that there really was a shortage. And why is there a shortage? Well, they went through all sorts of different reasons. I won't take you through the details, but this study that the government put together documents the different reasons. The bottom line is that the drugs that were growing in popularity are the ones that are available, and the drugs that didn't have a lot of popularity were the ones that are experiencing shortages. That's almost by definition, but here's an interesting fact about these. So the drugs that were experiencing shortages, they were being used less and less, lower volume over time, and the ones that were not experiencing shortages were growing in popularity. But here's the really interesting table in this study. The ones that were experiencing drug shortages had price declines. And the ones that were experiencing no shortages were the ones where the prices were going up. So the generics, the ones where you had price competition and the price was going down, not surprisingly, manufacturers were simply not interested in offering them. And the government report concluded that basically capacity is an issue. You can't change drug manufacturing capacity overnight. And so if you've got a limited capacity, you've got to make decisions on how to use the capacity. No firm will choose the route unless it receives a higher price in the market or other compensation. So in other words, what these two studies, the one by Bach and the one by the Health and Human Services Department, is saying is that drug manufacturers are responding to incentives. If you allow them to charge a higher price, they'll be happy to provide drugs. In fact, over the last 2.5 years, we've had 38 new cancer drugs approved by the FDA, 38 new drugs. And yet these sterile injectables that save lives are not available. You have to go to Europe to get them in many cases. So the point of this is that markets matter, that this is an issue that needs to be addressed.